Hello everybody, welcome to Life Science Live. Sorry we're getting started just a minute late. The bell's rang for a really long time. So, which you can hear where we are. Oh, I gotta erase one of our answers really fast. We're gonna be talking about rivers and trout today. And so we're gonna start kind of talking a little bit about the river in general and then talking about trout a little bit more specifically. But yes, we'll get into it. Hopefully, yeah, we can see this diagram pretty okay out here. And there's a few people walking around the museum working, so hopefully we can hear each other pretty well. So, let's get started. Talking about the anatomy of the river is pretty cool because you have to remember that there's a ton of different animals that come and utilize the river other than us and fish when we're tubing or doing whatever. In the Provo River, there's sometimes even moose. There's a ton of birds that are coming in, so it's unique to see that the river isn't actually just a straight line with straight walls. It has a lot of curves, it has a lot of contour, has a lot of different currents inside of it, and it really is alive. And there's also plants and various obstructions in it that make each part of the river unique. And because water runs so quickly, the river actually changes all the time. So it's really cool to recognize that anatomy and see how it's changing and how it's affecting other animals that are using the river. So I will preface this and say this is my best depiction of a specific piece of the river at Vivian Park. If you know where that is on the Provo River, there's a big sign there. You can totally go there. That's where a lot of people finish tubing too. So I'm going to kind of outline that right now. Up here at the top this is called a riffle. And so in describing what that looks like, a riffle is going to be an area with shallower water. There might even be rocks that are coming out of the surface that you can see from the bank before you're inside. And because of this, the water is going to be meandering around these rocks. It's probably not moving as fast either, just because it doesn't have the surface tension to really pull together. And so this is going to be an area that collects a lot of debris. It's also going to be an area where the water is very shallow, where you can see, but nevertheless, there's going to be fish running through here. And it's important to recognize this because the three things that our trout need always is rest, oxygen, and food. And so we're going to see how they can find these on the river. So this is a riffle. Again, shallower water, the water is meandering around. It's very just straight shot. It could be more of a turning part of the river, but not a lot of force behind the water. After you go to a riffle, you're going to reach a point called a run. And this is where kind of some of that debris, some of the things that are in the way, causing the water to meander, are going to be out of the way, and the water is going to get a little bit deeper and start running faster. And so it's almost kind of seems like it's a downhill slope in terms of just looking at the river bottom. Just going to get deeper, 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 could be faster and faster. And when the water gets deeper, we kind of have a few things that can happen. One of which is that we can have an eddy. So like I said, this is my best picture of a certain part of the river at Vivian Park. If you park at Vivian and then you walk up the train tracks just about like 5 minutes, you can get to the swimming hole. Local people, you're going to know what I'm talking about. There's a huge rock or like cement square that's out at Vivian Park in the river. And this eddy is crazy deep. If you jump in, you'll be all the way over your head. And the only reason why this eddy works is because, similar right here, the river curves in. If the river were to curve around this rock, that eddy wouldn't exist. The water would just shoot around it and probably smooth the edge of that rock. But because the river curves in, water is coming with some force off of a run at the edge of a riffle and runs around that rock and is swirling in to a pool. And so on the edge right behind this eddy as well, we have a pool. And this is just where water is much deeper into the river. The last couple things that I want to point out is, especially at Vivian Park and along the Provo River, we have tons of seams, which is where two different currents come together on the river. One is really fast, one it could be slower. And so that would be kind of on this side, where really fast moving water meets really slow moving water. This is called a seam. Okay, and then again, as these meander back into more shallow water and we slow back down, we might be reaching more rocks. At Vivian Park, this would be kind of where the bridge is. This is where everybody jumps out of their tube. This is called tail out. Okay, so this is kind of just a rough sketch of our river. And if you go to Vivian Park, I want everybody to go, if you're watching this, and just kind of look, and you'll be able to see all of these parts in just that one little stretch, which is really cool. Looking at the river, we have to make note of a few things. Fish really need to rest, and so they're going to be looking for places where they can be on the side where the current is not so strong, have a moment, and then swim, and they're also looking for places where they can pick up food. The river is kind of a big drive-through window for the fish. They're looking for things that are dropping into the river that they can eat and keep going. So, a few places that they like to be is on the edge of a riffle, right where a run is starting, because this is more shallow water, a little bit less force. They're going to sit on the end of that riffle and just move their fins and just catch whatever's falling off the end of the riffle and eat it. They're also looking for obstructions like this. Maybe it's a rock, or maybe it's just a big log. There are tons of logs on the Provo River, and they're going to be sitting on the edge of that and looking for things that are going to whip around right to them for them to eat. And lastly, these seams also are a huge deal because this is where they rest. So in detail, let's talk about trout for just a second and talk about rest, oxygen, and food. And again, if anybody has any questions, they can feel free to drop them in as we keep going. Rest is a big deal for fish. Most people say that fish do not sleep. Upon further investigation, it's kind of a hot debate whether fish sleep or not. But one thing that we do know is fish never close their eyes. They have constant eyelids open all the time, which kind of makes sense because there isn't really a lot of dust and debris like we face in the river. So what they're doing is they might be on the edge of a seam or on the edge of the river, maybe in a pool, and this is where they rest. And what they're doing is they're hardly moving their fins and they're resting. Sometimes it looks like they're not even moving their fins at all. And the way that they're able to do this is kind of in the top of the fish, right here, structurally. There is what we call a fish bladder or a swim bladder. And kind of what that looks like structurally, if you're gutting a fish ever, is it kind of looks like this. Honestly, kind of looks like that. And it's white. It's very, very white. And so what that is it's actually a chamber in the top of the fish that's just full of gases. And these fish really rely on that to float. And so that's what they're doing. When it looks like they're never moving their fins and they're just on the edge, they're relying on that swim bladder to help keep them afloat. And they really are. So they're kind of like a hot air balloon, just bouncing, relying on that bladder. And so this is one way that they rest. Other aquatic animals, for example, dolphins, have these really cool systems where they can like turn off like half of their brain and keep another half on. It's called like bilobal. And that is really cool. Fish, we do not think that they do anything like that, but they do rest and rely on that swim bladder. The next thing that we need to talk about is oxygen. And again, kind of similarly with trout and other fish, gill structures are not the same on every aquatic animal, and they don't all function the same. So we're just going to talk about it generally, very, very generally. So generally, just like in humans, breathing is all about exchanging gases. We're trying to get out our negatives and bring in the positive things that we need and get out the excess that we do not need, the waste. And so what the gills do, and these ones don't actually open or anything, they're just painted on, but what they're doing is water is going to be flowing over top of the gills. The gills are going to be opening and closing like this. And on the inside of the gill, blood is rushing to the surface of the skin or the fleshy inside of the gills as water is coming by, and they're going to be exchanging an ionic exchange and exchanging gases. And so that is how fish are breathing in and out. And when you hold a fish in your hand, you can feel them just in your hand, just the way that we do. And so that is just simply, that is what they do. Again, the water is running over those gills and they're just exchanging those gases from within the gills. Okay, cool. This brings us to a very important topic, which is charging fish, which a lot of people do when they catch fish. They're so excited that they caught a fish, and especially small ones on the Provo River, They're so excited that they've caught one. They grip it really tight in their hand because they're fishing by themselves and they really want to take a picture of their fish. It still has the hook in its mouth, or maybe it's out. They grip it really tight, they take a picture, and then they're really nervous about dropping their phone, and they just throw the fish into the river. So that isn't the best thing to do because our fish has been out of water. He doesn't have water running over his gills, so he's not exchanging those gases. He's not breathing. And then you just squeezed him, he's out of energy, and you just threw him in the river. So there's a possibility that they could not start swimming, they could hit a rock, they might not make it if you treat them that way. So you gotta make sure that you recharge the fish. So this is about rest, and this is about oxygen. So we're gonna very carefully hold the tail of our fish, which is sometimes easier said than done because sometimes fish are really small. Maybe you can just hold it in your hand really gently, and you want to charge the fish like this. And so what we're doing is we're helping that exchange of gas happen by having water, forcing the rush of water over top of those gills so that they can exchange those gases, and then eventually when they're ready, when they're rested and they've caught their breath, they'll swim away. But this is important because we don't want to just throw them back in the river when they're tired and out of breath. So I'll just keep holding our rainbow trout. But the last thing we need to talk about is food. And fish are awesome. They eat pretty much anything, which is kind of neat. They're eating terrestrial insects. They're also eating aquatic insects. Sometimes they're eating bits of trees and plants that are falling into the water. They're eating eggs of other fish, sometimes even straight up other fish. They're doing a lot to survive, and they're really smart. And so they are quite selective as to what they want to eat. And so it's kind of tricky if you're a fisherman or if you're just trying to observe fish to figure out what the daily special is. And so there are things that you can do to kind of learn. One thing that you can do is if you catch a fish, you can very carefully use a stomach pump and look inside of the fish and see what they're eating. This is a lot of what scientists do when they're studying fish to try to see what patterns they can find about them. Is they'll use a stomach pump, and you have to very carefully pump their stomach because if it's a smaller fish, you could reverse their stomach and kill them. So you need to be very careful, and you can see what's inside. Another thing that you can do is if you've caught a fish and you're planning on eating it, when you're gutting that fish, cut open that stomach and see what they've been eating. See what's in there, see what color it is, see kind of the shape. Does it look like an egg? Is it looking more wormy? These are things that you can do to figure out what they're eating, as well as just observing the river, seeing what insects are on top, seeing if fish are coming up to eat them. So these are some things. Another thing you can do is use the internet. There are tons of reports that are going to tell you what fish are eating, what at what time of the day are they doing it, but it's hard to know. And at certain seasons of the year, they might be wanting more of another thing. Right now in the UNAs and around Provo, a lot of people, if you ask, they're going to be talking about caddis and talking about these caddis hatches. So kind of to conclude, unless we have more questions, I will read you the river report of the day today for the Provo River so you know what it looks like. And I would love to hear about what you guys see out there. Make sure that you leave some comments as to what you see and look for these pieces of anatomy in the structure and look for these structures on our fish. But today on the Provo River, they're saying the best time to fish is in the morning. The Middle Provo is also the best place to fish right now. They're saying the best access points are the Bunny Farm or River South Road, which are a little bit closer to Heber. And these are our flies that they're recommending, and I'll tell you kind of what they look like. They're saying a Rouse J-dub Salbug, which is kind of like a roly-poly, a Canvas Baetis, a Griffith's Gnat, we know what gnats are, Magic Midge, a Zebra Midge, which is kind of a striped, black and white or black and silver looking fishhook, a nymph, a Hare's Ears nymph, or some Rainbow Warriors, mean green caddis. And so if you're looking up these, they'll tell you what size, what color to be looking for, but these are kind of our secrets. But anyways, in review, looking at our river, it's a lot more complicated than it looks. We can figure out where fish want to rest. We can figure out where their food is coming from, where it's going to drop to them the best, and also where the river is the fastest, where it would be the hardest to see fish, because we know a little bit about their bodies. They need to have rest, they need to have a place of rest, they need to have oxygen, and they need to easily access their food. So these are a few things. If you guys are tuning in right now live, or if you're watching this later, feel free to drop some comments. Tell us if you go out to the river. Tell us if you see any of these anatomy pieces or anything else about your fishing. And also, if you have any questions, you can still feel free to drop them, and I'll type you back and respond to you. But this has been Life Science Live. I'll see you guys next Friday.